Hi, everybody, and welcome to this latest edition of the Michigan State Spartans Insider Podcast. I'm your beat reporter for Michigan State Spartans on SI, Aiden Champion. Coming to you on what was a pretty nice Tuesday in terms of weather for you Michiganders, or at least for those of you living in the East Lansing area. Finally got, a decent day here. Seems like this spring is taking forever to come, even though it's here. Haven't necessarily gotten very nice days. Kind of bizarre considering we're past the midway point of April, and before you know it, we'll be in May. Then before you know, we'll be in summer. So exciting times ahead. Um, but with spring comes transfer portal talk, and Michigan State football once again fell victim to it today as uh, two young wide receivers, Jalen Brown and Austin Clay, are testing the waters. Two guys who didn't play last year, redshirt freshmen, but were both three-star recruits in the 2024 class. And while it's not a very significant loss, um, you do kind of got to think about the future. And these were two guys that could have been part of that with this wide receiver room. My guess is, they probably saw what was in front of them with the transfer portal additions from the winter. This obviously had been one of Michigan State's deeper rooms because of the transfer portal, brought in several transfers to this wideout room. And I would just assume, I don't know what their thought process was, but if I'm them, I'm looking at this and saying, you know what, I'm not going to do another year of this where I'm not getting impactful snaps. They seem to have, the bulk of their room established in terms of guys who are going to see significant playing time. And um, in that regard, I don't necessarily blame them. But while these aren't very significant, you know, blows to the roster, like I said, you got to think about the big picture. Michigan State did a great job at bringing in adjusting needs with the wideout room and bringing in these transfers, not just, band-aid additions either. These were pretty solid transfer pickups, guys from smaller schools, but nonetheless, had great seasons last year. Um, but you gotta think about long term, and looking at the roster and looking at eligibility. I mean, Alante Brown, he's a 6 year, and then Omari Kelly, they brought in from Middle Tennessee State. He's a senior. Rodney Bullard, um, he's a redshirt senior. Um, Evan Boyd from Central Michigan was, um, didn't have a huge impact for the Chippewas last year, but um, could end up being, a pretty solid wide receiver for Michigan State. He's still young, redshirt sophomore, um, but there aren't many. Krishan McCray, redshirt junior. So, you look at that, and then you look at Nick Marsh too. I mean, this is a guy who we don't know where he'll be in a year. I think a lot will depend, um, or that will depend a lot on, how this team does this year. Um, because, when you've got a guy like Nick Marsh, you have a star on your hands here. Transfer portal, I mean, that's always something you got to worry about. You don't know how long you'll have these guys. Um, I believe Marsh loves where he's at, but as you start getting older and people tell you how good you are, might think you have it better somewhere else. So, um, that's thinking down the line, but you have to think like that. So, And of course there will be recruiting, um, and there will be transfers, in years to come. But there's something to be said about growing your team from the ground up too. I do think that while college football, college athletics in general is so reliant on the transfer portal now, development is key, and um, building up your team um, in a way that they know your program, know the culture, and develop through it. I think that is still an important way to go. And I feel like Michigan State knows that. Um, and I just think that recruiting is still very much important. And losing two guys like these, it does, you know, it is kind of a blow. But for right now, they'll be fine. I do think now, while you were looking at this room as being one of the deepest on the team going, coming out of spring camp. Now, not so much. You might want to add one or two more pieces through the transfer portal. They might, they're probably okay if they don't, but you want depth. I know Jonathan Smith stresses wanting depth, wanting to create competition. So that is a room now that I think you do need to look at, whereas you didn't necessarily need to a few days ago. Still think the edge rush position scenario you got to look at, and then secondary, especially with the loss of Dylan Tatum. But and then I had mentioned the other day, preferably I think they should look at the running back room still. Um, I don't I don't necessarily see them bringing in any more running backs. I think Smith likes what he has in that room. Um, but that's just, my preference there. Regardless, I do think you need to bring some guys in. Things got to get going now. Uh, this week, we're already getting to Wednesday now, and still nothing. And like I said the other day, I mean they did the bulk of their transfer recruiting in the winter, but now I do think you need to take advantage as much as you can when the portal is open. So, um, I think that is something they still very much need to do. Will they be okay if they don't? Maybe, but like I said on a previous podcast, I mean, you don't want to finish 5-7 again, or anything short of a bowl game, and look back and say we could have added guys in the spring, could have utilized that window that everyone else in college football was using, that other teams were prospering from. When these windows are open, they can make or break a team, they can make the difference. And so, like I said, you got to capitalize whenever you can. So, with all that said, thank you again, everyone, for tuning in. Uh, we're we're nearly through the week. We're getting there. Um, And I know it's tough as this weather gets nicer, it gets warmer, and you're stuck in the office. Um, but hang in there because um, you know summer's ahead and a whole lot to look forward to. Um, but as always, thank you for tuning in, and I hope you all have a great rest of your week. Thanks.